You also have to be realistic. So just because you're passionate about, let's say, the piano, does not mean you have to pursue and become a pianist. If you go to platforms like LinkedIn and Indeed and apply for a job, your chances of getting an interview are between 2% and 5%. So it's a very low percentage, a very low probability. So for every 100 applications, you can expect about 5 interviews. That's not good use of your time. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, how else can I get interviews? And there are many different strategies for that. One strategy that I highly recommend, and my last recommendation, is accessing hidden jobs. So in Canada, about 60% of the jobs are not advertised. So you won't find them on platforms like LinkedIn and Indeed. I've recruited over here, I've been a hiring manager, I've been a recruiter. And I've been working in Canada for close to now 17 years. So these are the three things that I look for on a resume. And I call them my 3 R's.
Now, I submit my resume and they love it just because I've followed the 3 R's and they call me for an interview. How do I go about preparing for the interview? Hello and welcome everyone. So today my special guest is Johan, and the reason he is here on the channel today is because he's a career coach and he has helped hundreds of professionals land jobs in great companies like big companies like PwC, Amazon, P&G, Unilever, you name it, all those big companies that we all want to join. He has helped many professionals get job in those companies. Given he is a career coach, so he helps people with resumes, their interviews, and also with their career. However, I'll stop sharing more of his introduction and I will pass it on to Johan to expand on his introduction. And then, Johan, I have a set of questions for you with regards to how an individual can land a job of their dream. What are the preparation they need to do? So we'll talk all about that. But first, over to you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Bahroz. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to be here with you today. I won't take too much of the time with my introduction, but as Behrouz mentioned, I am a career coach and I work predominantly with mid career professionals who are looking to gain clarity in terms of what's next for them in their careers, who are looking to really accelerate the process of getting more interviews, and who are looking to convert those interviews into job offers. So I help with end to end career coaching. And I have, like Bero said, I've helped now over 300 professionals land meaningful jobs and careers in some of Canada's top companies. And I really feel this is my purpose, my passion, which is to help other professionals find their purpose and find meaningful careers for them.
Great. So let me start by saying I see your work on LinkedIn, and there is amazing contribution that comes from you. And that was one of the reasons I was like, this is one individual I have to bring on the podcast because I'm sure you will add a lot of value to all the people who check out this podcast. But let's get going into the question I have. The first question is, I am an early career individual and I want a job. Maybe I just finished college, or maybe I've had a year or 2 year experience under my belt, but I want a job of my dream. I'm not happy with the job I got. I just got that job because I just moved out of the college, got the first thing that came my way. But now I want to take a step up. How do I go about searching for the job, looking for that job, and making sure that I get some traction on it as well?
Excellent question. And this is a question that I get very common, especially from students or people who have recently graduated or people who have, just a couple of years of experience. My recommendation is following a few steps. Step number one is doing a bit of soul searching. So I always tell people before you job search, it's important for you to soul search. And let me expand on that a little bit. So, what I mean by soul searching is really identifying and doing a deeper reflection on yourself. So, identifying your strengths. So, these are things you are naturally good at, your skills. So, these are things you have learned through education, certifications, and experience, as well as your interests. So these are things you are naturally passionate and motivated about. Along with this, you also want to drill down and reflect on your values. So values are things that are most important to you in your life and in your career right now, and that can include things such as integrity, recognition, family and work life balance, compensation, the reputation of the organization you want to work for, the flexibility you want to have in your job, right? So there's many different values, and these are things which are, extremely highly important for you, and you absolutely need to have them in your next step. So I have an exercise that I have, people go through, which is a career clarity exercise, where you do internal clarity first, so internal reflection first, before you go into the external clarity, which is then finding out, okay, based on my strengths, my values, my interests, what are the ideal roles for me, where it's not just going to be any other job, but it's going to be a career that is meaningful, that is fulfilling, where I will thrive, and also working for a company that celebrates me, as opposed to just working for any organization. So that is, the essential first step in the process for any new recent graduates or people who are looking to even pivot into different careers but are feeling stuck or feeling lost. This clarity exercise is very important.
So amazing. I like the fact that you talked about passion because it's something which is underrated, especially when I was young, and I know a lot of young people as well. That's the least of the consideration. It's all about let's just get a job in a good company, or a comparison with other set of people in my college who are getting jobs in a particular company in a particular type, and you go like, I just need to follow the herd. And if you're not passionate about something, I think short term is fine, but in the long term you'll struggle. And it is far important you design yourself for success now in the long run versus just saying, I will live the day to day and I will think about tomorrow. So I think that's beautifully said. You did mention that there is a framework you follow in helping people find their passion. I don't want you to go in detail of that framework, but if you can give some tips, because for an for someone in 20s, like, I didn't know what my passion was. I was just going, as I said, what my friends were doing, what my parents told me to do, and I just followed that path, only to realize very late in life, if I had known or someone had guided me what my passion is, what my interests are, and what my strength is, I would have been a very different direction. And what I'm doing today, I would have been far ahead in that race because I had started earlier. I started what I'm doing today very late, which is my strength, my passion, just because I didn't realize what my passion, strength were.
Yeah, yeah, and this term passion, Barrows, is also very loosely defined, and can be very subjective, right? So some people think of passion as hobbies. Some people think as passion as a desire that motivates them, right? When I talk about passion, at least from a career coaching perspective, it is strictly passion related to occupation. Okay, now how do you go about finding your passion, and then of course, following your passion? So there are assessments out there that help you identify your career interest. So one of them that I recommend using, it's called the Holland Code. So the Holland Code inventory, and there's a free version available online as well. It will give you 6 different domains of interest, of passion, and it will give you a score for each of those domains for yourself, right? So some of the domains are things like artistic. So you might, have vocations where you can express yourself, where you can be creative. So roles like marketing would be, something in the artistic realm. There are also roles which are, investigative, so research based roles. There are also roles which are very conventional, so things like tax and accounting. And then there's a category called enterprising, which is, if you want to venture and become an influencer. And these are typically people who are very sociable, very energetic, right? So once you take this assessment, at least it gives you a preliminary view of what your interest is. That's one approach. The other approach that I also like to take is I like to do a little bit of self reflection and ask a few questions to yourself. So some of the questions I like to ask uh, are these questions. So one of them is, what do you listen to, what do you read and watch in your spare time? So that will give you, pretty good insights into what your passion potentially could be. The other question to ask is, what kind of topics are you interested in and that you enjoy learning more about, but you also enjoy teaching other people? So that typically is also aligned with your passion. Another question I like to ask is, what activities or tasks increase your energy when you're working on them? So basically, when you're working on these activities and tasks, you lose track of time, as opposed to activities that you're always looking at the clock, that when am I going to be done with this, and they in fact drain your energy. So you want to avoid those type of activities because those are not aligned with your interests or with your passion. Okay. And one last question you can also ask yourself is, if you could make money doing anything in the world, what would that be? Right? And then follow your path along there. One caution I will tell the listeners is, you also have to be realistic. So just because you're passionate about, let's say, the piano, does not mean you have to pursue and become a pianist. Just because you love, taking pictures, does not mean you will end up being a photographer, right? Passions can also be something you can do in addition to your main job. You can do this, on the side, on evenings, weekends. And if you have a very deep desire and you feel that you can convert this into a career that is sustainable for yourself and your family, then of course, by all means, you can pursue your passion to that extent as well.
Got it. This is lovely. This is amazing. Thank you. Now let's get moving, which is, I know now what my passion is using the techniques that you've shared. I know what kind of job I want. I've also shortlisted the companies. But when I go on LinkedIn and I want to apply on those companies, there are like 100 applicants which have applied for that role already. How do I stand a chance in getting any traction between amongst those 100 individuals who have already applied? So how do I go about applying and getting traction for the role I want?
Yeah. So this is where we talk about, having an effective job search strategy, right? And most people who I talk to, they don't have a job search strategy. Or if they have a job search strategy, their job search strategy is going onto platforms like Indeed and LinkedIn, looking for jobs, applying for jobs, and hoping for the best. So that's not a very good approach, because that will result in frustration. That will result in very few interviews coming your way. So these are the steps I would recommend to follow. Step number one: be very clear on your target job, right? So for example, decide on which domain you want to focus on. And when I say domain, these are functions like HR, IT, finance, marketing. You also want to take it one step further. So for example, within marketing, you want to ask yourself, do I want to be like just a generalist? Do I want to focus on social media marketing? Do I want to do inside, internal, external types of marketing roles? So being very focused on the type of marketing roles as well is very important. So that way you're not applying to every single marketing job out there, because most of them won't be a fit for you. And if it's not a fit for you, guess what? The recruiter won't call you for an interview. The other thing you want to decide on is the appropriate level. So a lot of folks will apply to jobs that are either too junior and they're overqualified for that, or too senior and they're underqualified for that. So you really have to do a little bit of introspection to find out what is the appropriate level for you. Now, if you are a newcomer coming to Canada from a different country, more often than not, you will find it difficult to find a role at the same level that you had back home. right? And the reason for this is because you don't have the local experience over here. So for that, I would recommend, just talking to a few people, talking to a few recruiters, hiring managers, and deciding, let's say if you came here working as a director, finding out if that director level is still something that is appropriate for you, that you're qualified for, or you want to take one step below that just to get your foot in the door, and then just go on to the director level in your next role after that might be a smarter strategy. Okay, so once you've decided, the role, the level, and all of this, now you have to think about, okay, how do I get interviews? Because the purpose of applying for jobs is to get interviews. If you go to platforms like LinkedIn and Indeed and apply for a job, your chances of getting an interview are between 2% and 5%. So it's a very low percentage, a very low probability. So for every 100 applications, you can expect about 5 interviews. That's not good use of your time. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, how else can I get interviews? And there are many different strategies for that. One strategy that I highly recommend is around building relationships. So before you even begin looking and applying, what you should do is you should create a target list of your ideal companies that you want to work for, and you start building relationships with people in your role, in your target role, or one level above your target role, which is typically the hiring manager, and start building relationships with them. Start getting to know them, start getting to be curious about, their profile, their career journey. The reason why it's important to build relationships and build a network is because then when you start applying for jobs, you can leverage that network for insights, for advice, for referrals. And then this increases your chances from 5% to maybe 30%, 40%. And this is something I strongly recommend. Now, the other end of job searching is having jobs and opportunities come to you. So instead of being reactive and searching and networking, how can you have recruiters and hiring managers finding you and approaching you? And you can do that by establishing a personal brand. Okay, personal brand, like we won't go into detail, on this, but look up what personal branding is. It's basically identifying who you are, what you want, and how you create a unique value proposition for yourself, and essentially what's the benefit of hiring you, right? So LinkedIn, for example, is a great platform to create a personal brand for yourself. And if you use LinkedIn to do that for yourself, you will notice that people are now visiting your profile. People are viewing, the content you're posting out there or the things you're sharing, and they become interested in calling you for interviews as opposed to you chasing them. So personal branding is a very powerful strategy that you absolutely need to have in your job search. And my last recommendation is accessing hidden jobs. So in Canada, about 60% of the jobs are not advertised. So you won't find them on platforms like LinkedIn and Indeed. So you can get access to these jobs again by knowing the right people in the right companies. So this is where, again, if you network properly, you can get access to these opportunities. And this is where the competition is significantly less. So you have a much better chance of getting an interview.
Got it. Thank you. This was really detailed and helpful. I have a follow up question. You didn't mention about education. And since we are talking about Canada and there is a big immigrant population as well who have not studied from Canada, they don't have experience in the job market as well. Would you recommend, and in what cases would you recommend someone to say, maybe you need an MBA here because that will be a good addition on your profile? And mind you, MBA is not cheap. MBA is just one example. There could be cheaper versions as well. But what are your thoughts in terms of improving your skill set or taking your resume value up by adding a Canadian education in it? Is it worth it or not?
So very good question. And this is a question that always comes up is, I have moved here to Canada and I'm struggling with, finding opportunities, and I'm struggling with getting interviews. what's lacking, because I have the experience. So is it that I need to study over here, and if I study, what courses should I take? Do I do a degree? Do I do a diploma? Do I do a certification? So here's my recommendation. My recommendation is to first be very clear again on what is it that you're going after. What's next for you, right? What is that specific role, that specific level? Then I would have you do a job analysis exercise. So in this job analysis exercise, you will look at 10 job postings, okay, for your target role, and start analyzing each one to find out what are they looking for in terms of education and certifications. So let's say you look at 10 job postings and MBA comes up on 2 or 3 out of those 10 postings. So then you know that MBA is not very critical because only 2 out of the 10 required for you to have an MBA. But let's say a PMP, for those of you in project management, comes up in 7 or 8 of the job posting, or the CHRP, which is the designation for HR professionals, or the CBAP, right, which is for business analysts. If you notice these kind of certifications are coming up frequently on the job postings, then you know that these are the jobs I'm interested in, that I'm qualified for, but I don't have the certification. So this is then your cue to go ahead and pursue that. The other thing I would also recommend is, along with analyzing these 10 job postings, talk to about 10 people who are in the roles that you're aspiring for, and talk to people who've had a similar journey as you. So not someone who has, for example, born and raised in Canada, or who moved here 20 years ago. Talk to people who moved here in the recent past, and they are working in the job or in the company that you desire to work for, and then have a look at their profile and see how they managed to get that role, right? Look at their education section on LinkedIn, or their certification section on LinkedIn, and have a conversation with them, saying that, I aspire to be and get to where you are. What would be your top 3 or 4 recommendations in terms of upskilling and in terms of education? And you can get a lot of good insights from those conversations.
This is amazing input, and I really love the fact which is you learn from others who are slightly ahead of you, because they are the ones who are in the right position to teach you. Okay, let me move forward now. So I've figured out what role I want, what is suited for me, which company I want to apply. I've networked as well, and the individual I networked with said, great, I'm ready to help you, can you please pass on your resume to me? Any tips on the resume? What, especially with regards to the Canadian market, is there something specific that I need to watch out, I need to be careful about when crafting my resume? Any thoughts, any tips on that would be lovely.
Yeah, so there are many, free resources out there, and many resume professionals out there who give excellent guidance on resume. So I won't go too much in depth into, the format, for example, of a Canadian style resume, because that you can find online, and there are many templates available as well, right? When I Because I've recruited over here, I've been a hiring manager, I've been a recruiter, and I've been working in Canada for close to now 17 years. So these are the 3 things that I look for on a resume, and I call them my 3 R's. Okay, the first R is readability. So how readable is your resume, right? Is it all cramped up into one page because someone told you that you have to have a one page resume? Do you have enough breathing room, like enough white space in your resume where people can easily look at the different sections and your different content for each of those sections? So the visual appeal of your resume, believe it or not, is extremely important. So that's the first R. The second R, which is very important for your resume, is relevancy or relevance. So, how relevant is your resume to your target role? Okay. So, again, for this exercise, or to make your resume relevant, you want to have a look at a few job postings for your target role, and then analyze the experiences and the skills that keep showing up across those different job postings. And you want to make sure that those skills get added on to your resume, because you know what the recruiters are looking for based on the job postings. And when they look at your resume, they expect to find those skills, those technical skills, those hard skills on your resume as well. So you definitely need to have them in, different sections of your resume. So that's the second R, is being relevant. The third R is being results focused. So a lot of the resumes that I see are very task focused. So they will tell me that, in my previous roles, this is what I did. These were my tasks, these were my responsibilities. Recruiters in Canada don't care as much for your responsibilities, but they care for the results you achieved performing those responsibilities, right? So, for example, it's not enough to say that I trained a group of people, right? But if you tell me that I trained, 50 individuals in 2 weeks and helped to increase their productivity by 20%, which was, a 10% year over year jump, and which helped the company save $5,000, that to me is a lot more effective. Because if you trained people, I don't know, how effective was your training, but when you add some quantifiable numbers, metrics, and results, it tells me how well you perform that role. And this gives the recruiter confidence that if he's done this successfully in the past, he can do it successfully for me as well. So those would be my three top recommendations, the three R's for a powerful resume.
Again, this is amazing. What I loved the most was the readability. And the reason I say that is because I've recruited people as well. And frankly speaking, I don't spend, and probably this is true for everyone, not more than 5 to 10 seconds to quickly scan a resume. And if it's difficult to read, if I'm not able, if my eyeballs are not able to land on the place you want me to land in those 10 seconds, even if it's you have good material in there but I couldn't find it, then it will just go on the side and will be looking into the next resume. I completely agree, makes sense.
That is very true, and especially in the Canadian job market, it is very very competitive, and typically there are fewer roles, but a surplus of talent, surplus of job applicants, right? So at Deloitte, which is where I work, we receive typically about 200 to 500 applications for one role. Now, it is not humanly possible for a recruiter to look at all 300 applications, because they're also having different roles they're recruiting for, right? It's not just one role. So how do they prioritize? They prioritize based on, like Barrows was rightly saying, looking at the resume and seeing, can I quickly glance through this resume and find out the relevant information that I'm looking for, right? Once the readability check is done, then they look for relevancy. So you're applying for a marketing specialist role. What have you done in the past? Oh, you were a research associate. That has nothing to do with marketing. So automatically it's not relevant, and they move on to the next candidate. And once you've passed the relevancy test, then they look to see, okay, he did work as a marketing specialist, but what results did he produce over there, right? So in those 10-15 seconds, you have to check all three boxes. And yeah, it's difficult to to do this, but once you spend some time on your resume and make sure these boxes are checked off, then it's just a matter of customizing it for every application, right? Resume is a very hard thing to work on initially, but I would strongly recommend making the time and taking the effort to do that.
Got it, thank you. Now I submit my resume and they love it just because I've followed the 3 R's, and they call me for an interview. How do I go about preparing for the interview?
Yeah, excellent question. So there is, I can talk about this for a couple of hours, but I will give my top tips in terms of how to best prepare for an interview. So, first and foremost, step number one is doing your research. Okay. And you want to research four things. You want to research the industry that you've applied for. You want to research the company, and this includes researching on the company website, but also any news or articles published about the company recently. You want to research about the role, which you do using the job posting, and you want to research about your interviewers. Okay. So that's step number one, is doing your research. Step number two is coming up with 10 career stories. And a career story is basically a story about your accomplishment from the past. So coming up with 10 such examples of career accomplishments. And if you are new and you don't have 10, start with maybe five. Okay. And career accomplishments don't have to be always related to previous jobs. It can also be tied into, projects you worked on during school. It can be tied into, contract roles, freelance work, projects, as well as volunteer work that you've done. Okay, but come up with at least 5 to 10 accomplishments. And the way you choose your accomplishments are based on what is required in the role. So this is when you do your research by looking at the job posting, you will see that there are certain skills that stand out, right? So for example, if you're applying for a marketing job, you will notice things like, email marketing, acquiring new talent, customer experience, content strategy, right? Those would be the keywords. You will also see certain softwares or tools that they require you to use, right? So there might be some tools like CRM softwares like Salesforce, for example, or basic MS Office tools like Excel, Word, PowerPoint. So whatever you see in the job posting, you want to make a list of those 5 to 10 skills, and then you want to come up with 5 to 10 career stories where you have used those skills and where you have accomplished results using those skills. Okay, so that's step number two, is preparing those career stories. Step number three is preparing yourself mentally. Okay, so this is a big part. A lot of people go into interviews with fear, with anxiety, and that is perfectly normal, right? A lot of us don't get interviews, day after day, week after week. So the time when we get an interview, all of a sudden now we are like, wow, I have this interview, I am super nervous for it. But I would challenge you, and I would challenge you to change that nervous energy into excitement. Okay. I know it's not easier said than done, but this is really your opportunity to shine and to showcase. And you want to go in there with a mindset that, they like me, or else they would not have called me for an interview. So now it's just a matter of me articulating my experiences, my value, and how I can be such a valuable asset for the team and for the company, right? So that mindset becomes very, very important. um, and then the final tip I would have is, when you are in the interview, don't make it too formal. So go in there with, as though you were having a conversation with someone. Interviews that are robotic, where they ask you a bunch of questions and you answer a bunch of questions, typically don't go too well, even though you may have answered all the questions, because people hire people, right? People don't necessarily always hire qualifications and experience. So they need to, you need to showcase your experiences, but they also need to like you, right? And how do people like you? People like you if you build good rapport during the conversation, where it's a two-way conversation, right? Instead of them just bombarding you with questions. So try your best to make it as conversational as possible. Perfectly okay for you to ask them questions as well, and I would encourage you to ask them questions. Um, and yeah, even though you are nervous, even though you are anxious, go in there being calm, being confident. And one final thing, also in your interview, it's very important not just what you say, but how you say it. So things like eye contact, where you're looking at the camera, if it's, a virtual interview, where you're using hand gestures instead of just sitting back with your hands folded, right? Actively looking at the camera, actively engaged, showing that you're enthusiastic, showing your energy, will take your interview experience for yourself and for the other person to the next level. And again, this will want them to really hire you, as opposed to someone who is not does not seem very interested in the interview.
Thank you, Jan. Again, amazing tips. I just have two reflections. One is I would go back to what you said initially, which is you need to be very targeted in terms of which organization role you're applying for, because this is a lot of work. If you are applying for 100 positions, you won't be able to go that detailed and that accurate for that particular role, and you will be just bombarding your resume without practicing or preparing yourself for a win. You will be an average candidate. If you want to be a candidate who's a top candidate, you need to limit the amount of applications you fire and then go deeper into preparing for them. And the second reflection I have is interviewing skill. So this is a skill that you may not be demonstrating at your workplace day in day out. Like all I do at my workplace is very different from interview taking skills. So this is what I tell people as well, which is when they say just be yourself, I'm like, no, don't be yourself. Like bring out your personality, but you have to prepare. You need to know how you speak, what you speak, because what you are in practice at your workplace will might not be the skills that are required for you to ace the interview.
I agree with you. I think it's important, Beros, to be authentic, right? So you don't want to be someone that you're not. But while you're authentic, interviewing is a bit of a strategy game as well, right? Where you have to, even though you might be feeling nervous, you have to still appear calm. You have to speak clearly, you have to speak concisely, and you have to speak confidently. Nobody's going to hire you if they feel that you are not calm and confident, because then they won't, be comfortable putting you in their company, putting you in front of their customers, their clients, their stakeholders, right? So very important to be, be yourself, but at the same time up your game a little bit with that confidence. One thing I will say is nobody is born to be a natural interviewer. Sorry, naturally good at interviews. I mean, if you interview me now, for a job, even I will be nervous, even though, I coach people on interviewing. Why? Because every interview requires preparation and practice. The more you prepare your answers, the more you practice before your interview, this gives you that inner belief and inner confidence to perform well. So if there's one thing I will leave you with regards to interview is people who prepare and practice typically do a lot better than people who just go there and wing it.
Got it. Amazing, Johan. So, again, I'm just heading towards the end of our session. So, thanks for your time. The tips you gave me, a lot of them I took note as well, which I will be using in my coaching sessions. So, I got educated massively today as well. Thanks for the tips you shared. One last question I have for you, and rather, even before I ask the last question, I need to bring you up on our podcast one more time, but maybe talking more about the career journey. So how do we grow in our career? How do we develop and all? I think that's another animal in its own. So I don't want to bring those questions in now, but probably would love for followers and the people who will see this video to also let me know if they would be interested in that, and then we can bring you up again. But the question I have for you, which is the last question, is where can people find you and reach out to you in case they have help and they want to seek your services?
Yeah, so I am not active on a bunch of different online or social media platforms. The only platform I use quite actively is LinkedIn. So if you want to find me, if you want to connect with me, if you want to follow along with my journey, you can find me on LinkedIn. If you just search my first and last name, there are not too many people with my first and last name, so it will come up, in the search results. And let me know where that you saw me or you heard me on Beroz's podcast, so that way I have a little bit of context in terms of when you reach out to me.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Beroz. It's been a pleasure. I really, really, again, sincerely appreciate you having me on your podcast. Truly
Thank,
appreciate it.
thank you.